Okay, here we go with part 3, talking about functions now. Remember how functions are different than procedures. Functions return a value to the main program or wherever they're called from. So what does it look like that's different? Well, there's a few things. First of all, we talked about this earlier, instead of the word void, the return type is there. The return type would be something like string or int or whatever that this function is returning. There is a return type there instead of the word void, and it can be anything. Otherwise, it's fairly similar. But somewhere in the code, there has to be at least one return statement. So this would say, if this said string here, this would be return, and then whatever the return type here would be not the word string, but a variable or value that's of the same type that's up there, string, in the example that I used. Um, Notes. Return type is, like I said, is int or string or double or husky or whatever data type we'd like to return. And this, it could be an array. It could be, like I said, a record like this. It could be just about anything. And we'll see examples of all sorts of different return types as we go through the rest of this chapter. Then later in the program, to call the function, we could have the func name here with the matching parameters assigned to a variable, or we could have it printed out, whatever it is. But notice that since it's, and this is what it says, note that we couldn't just go func name like we did with a procedure, because remember the function returns something back to the program, so it needs to be doing something, either assigned to a variable name or being printed out to the console or whatever. We need the return value to be going somewhere or doing something. And I'll come back to that in a second. I'm going to go to the example. I'll come back right there in a moment. I want to go and go back to our example and show you what a function might look like. So in our example, and hopefully you're following along there, let's write a function. So we got public static, and let's say we're going to return an integer, and what should we do? Double it. We're going to bring in an integer, and I can call this anything I want, but maybe I'll just call it num for number. And then I have my quotes there, or my curly brackets, and I like having, whenever I put an end of a curly bracket, I want to say what's ending there. So when my functions in my programs get more complicated, I know what I'm doing as far as my curly brackets, because the procedures and inside structures and ifs and cases and fors and do's and all these different things, it's nice to know what each end bracket is ending. So here what we're going to do is we're just going to return 2 times the num. And notice that I could have this in a calculation. I could have this in here, something like int whatev equals 2 times num, and then return whatev if I wanted to. Or I could just do the calculation right there. Doesn't matter which. Right now, if I were to run this, remember, it's going to do my say hello 45, but it's not going to do anything with the double of that because I haven't called it. Notice what my warning was, that if I just go use the same sort of technique and say double it, and I put in 10 there, and I know the parameter is supposed to be an integer, so there's my double. If I were to run this, it's going to give me an error, I think. Oh, no, maybe it didn't. It didn't give me an error, but it didn't double it. It didn't do that. It didn't do anything because this function, it returned a value and it just sat there 20. So if I wanted to see that in action, I'd actually have to put it somewhere and get it doing something, right? So now it's going, this is a compound statement where it's going to double that, return that value, and now it's going to print out. And there's the 20. So when it called this function, it returned it back into this spot and then printed it out. And notice I could have it assigned to a variable here. So if I call this integer, maybe call this new num or something like that, doesn't matter, and I call double it 23. 23 is going to go in as the parameter, and it's going to return whatever to there, and maybe I want to print out both of them. Now notice, what is this going to do? If I were to do this right now, it's going to call this function double 10, return a value of 20. This new num is going to be 46, and then it's going to add those together, a compound statement. It's going to give me the value of 4666, I think. Yeah, 66. So that was an example of a function that's being called twice. To finish this video off, a couple of notices here. Got a couple more things to say. When we name our methods, usually there's an action word following by some appropriate description of what the method does. So we had, in our example, we had say hello. Say was the verb, and then whatever followed that describes it. So double it. Double was the verb. And notice in all of our built-in functions, parse int, draw oval. It was always an action word followed by a noun or two. And sometimes, sometimes it doesn't. It's hard to make that work, but that's kind of a convention. And it says, for example, calc average, get input, whatever, read line was a built-in one. And I went and did my example. You're welcome to include that example in here or not. That is completely up to you. I have one last point to make, and I'm not going to do a fourth video. I'm going to do it right now. So another note, to make our code more readable, we include a specific type of comment before a function or a procedure. This is a convention and not necessary for the code to work. So we didn't have this in there before, but these few lines make our code more readable. So I just copied that, and you should be doing this too. And from now on, you're doing this with all your functions, by the way. I paste that in there, press indent, then I kind of got to fix it up a little bit because it gets goofed up with the indenting. This at sign, by the way, is important, and it's strange, but so describe what the method does. So this one here, this method says hello. That's it, right? Sometimes it's a bit silly, but says hello to the user. That's it. Param name. So what parameter is? Well, we had the parameter was name and describe it. So this name is an inputted string used to say hello. And what was the return? Well, there wasn't return. There was no return, so I'm deleting that line. This was a procedure, right? Void was, and then here, in that one, indent, what would that one be? It's what it takes an input and returns the double 2 times the input. And this is a way for us to be able to share our code. This is kind of like a message to you as the programmer to yourself later about what this function was supposed to do. If you want to share your function, it allows other people to use it, and so on. This parameter is the number to be doubled. And then what's the return? The return is an integer. Whatever is double the input. And as an integer. And we know it's an integer because there's the return value. The parameter happened to be an integer in this case. Maybe I should put that in there. Integer number to be doubled. And then this code allows us to be able to read our functions a lot better. Okay, it's very similar to our header, which of course I've failed to put in there, and you should put a header in all your programs. But this sort of documentation, we'll talk about that again very soon. Very important to include that. So I do insist that you do that. It doesn't mean that it won't work if you leave it out, but you should put it in. Okay? All right, that's it. I think you've got an exercise, one exercise or maybe two exercises to do. And that's it.